So, last time we talked, my perfect new blended family had survived its first 24 hours. And when I say survived, I mean we had a full blown teenage turf war over a bedroom, a silent battle of passive aggressive picture frames, and a family dinner so quiet you could hear the ice melting. It was a start. But just when we found a fragile piece, the doorbell rang. And my charming, manipulative ex-husband, Mark, showed up on our doorstep with a smile that could cut glass and a gift designed to cause maximum chaos. And that's where we pick up. Because there are moments that change the entire direction of your life. For our new, fragile family, it wasn't a wedding vow or a shared meal. It was the sound of that doorbell. He stood there on our doorstep, radiating a charm so toxic it could probably wilt the flowers in my own shop. And I realized he wasn't just visiting. He was there to remind everyone that he held the original blueprints to my life, and he had no intention of letting us build anything new without his permission. Today, you're going to see how that extravagant gift he brought becomes a weapon to undermine my new husband, Michael. You'll watch as we try to do what all desperate parents do: create a set of family rules, only to have them spectacularly backfire. This is a story about the first big test of our family. A test that involves a sink full of dirty dishes, a broken curfew, and the 6 words every step-parent dreads hearing: "You're not my real dad." And it all leads to me standing in a dark hallway, listening through a closed door as my ex-husband whispers poison into my daughter's ear over the phone. A secret that, if revealed, could blow our entire family apart. The rules of engagement have changed, and I'm the one who has to make the next move. Stick with me, because today is all about power plays, broken rules, and a devastating confrontation. And you'll see the proof I uncovered that turned my ex-husband from an annoyance into an enemy. Let's get into it. So Michael, my sweet, flustered husband, does the only thing he can think to do. He invites Mark inside. And Mark glides into our living room like he owns the place, completely ignoring Michael and making a beeline for Chloe. You have to understand something about my ex-husband. Mark never showed up empty-handed. But his gifts were never just gifts. They were Trojan horses. Big, shiny, and beautiful on the outside, but filled with tiny soldiers ready to start a war the moment you brought them inside. He handed Chloe the enormous gift-wrapped box. She let out a squeal of pure joy and hugged her dad like he had just single-handedly saved a bus full of puppies. She tore it open, and of course, it was the brand new top-of-the-line gaming console she'd been begging for. The very same one Michael and I had a long conversation about just last week and decided was way too expensive for a regular, non-birthday-related Tuesday. And Michael, oh, poor Michael, he just stood there, looking completely blindsided. He had that tight, polite smile on his face, but I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching. He was trying so hard to be the gracious host, but he had just been completely outmaneuvered in his own home. Then Mark turned to him, clapped him on the shoulder like they were old buddies, and said, "I know kids these days, man. You gotta keep 'em happy. Right, princess?" And then he winked at Chloe. Do you see what he did there? It was brilliant. It was evil, but it was brilliant. In one single move, he achieved a perfect trifecta of sabotage. First, he painted himself as the cool, generous dad who understands his daughter's needs. Second, he instantly turned Michael into the strict, stingy stepdad who says no. And third, he reminded Chloe who really provides for her, who really has the money, the power, the control. It wasn't about the game console. It was a power play, plain and simple. A checkmate move delivered right in our living room, and we couldn't do anything about it without looking like ungrateful jerks. That's the thing about dealing with a master manipulator. They force you into a corner where your only options are to swallow your anger or look petty and controlling. After Mark finally made his grand exit, leaving behind a trail of smug satisfaction, the house was filled with this cold, heavy silence. The gaming console sat in the middle of the floor like an unexploded bomb, and Michael and I both knew, without saying a word, we couldn't let this happen again. We needed to establish some order. We needed rules. We thought a simple list, a piece of paper, could fix the broken foundation Mark had just exposed. We were about to learn just how wrong we were. After Mark finally made his grand exit, leaving behind a trail of smug satisfaction and a giant gaming console in his wake, the house was filled with this cold, heavy silence. The new toy just sat there, in the middle of the living room floor, like an unexploded bomb. Michael and I looked at each other, and we both knew, without saying a word, we couldn't let this happen again. We had to do something. Now, my husband, being an architect, believes in structure, in blueprints, in clear, established rules. And I think, in that moment of desperation, he truly believed that we could fix our broken family foundation with a piece of paper and a dry erase marker. So that evening, he called for it. The first official Harrison Thorne Family Summit. It was just as awkward as it sounds. He had us all gather around the dining room table and even brought out a little whiteboard he uses for work. Honestly, it felt less like a family meeting and more like a corporate team-building exercise that no one actually wanted to be at. We tried to lay down the law, the basics, the blended family 101 stuff you read about in parenting magazines. We proposed 3 simple, non-negotiable rules. Rule number 1, a 10 p.m. curfew on weeknights. Rule number 2, a chore chart, so no one person, and by no one person I mean me, was stuck doing everything. Rule number 3, absolutely no phones at the dinner table. And yes, that one was aimed squarely at Chloe. The reaction from the kids was exactly what you'd expect. Leo, my quiet stepson, just sat there doodling in his notebook. He didn't argue. He just gave these little non-committal nods whenever Michael looked his way. He had basically reached a state of teenage zen, physically present, but mentally a million miles away. Chloe, on the other hand, was actively, aggressively bored. She rolled her eyes so hard I was afraid they might fall out. She sighed, she slumped in her chair. She did everything short of filing her nails to show us how completely lame she thought this was. The only reason she eventually agreed was because I gave her my patented, "I am your mother and I am begging you with my eyes to please just go along with this" look. We wrote the rules on a piece of paper in bright red marker and stuck it on the fridge like a peace treaty being pinned to the town hall door. We all stood back and looked at it, and for a moment, just one moment, it felt like we had done something. We had a plan. We had structure. What a joke. That piece of paper on the fridge wasn't a peace treaty. It was a declaration of war. It was a list of rules just begging to be broken. And it took less than 24 hours for the first line to be crossed. The rules were on the fridge, written in bright red marker, looking all official and important. The Harrison Thorne Family Constitution, I called it in my head. And like most constitutions, it took less than 24 hours for the First Amendment, or in this case, the first violation, to occur. The first test of our new world order came, as these things often do, in the form of a sink full of dirty dishes. According to our brand new, beautifully laminated chore chart, it was Chloe's night to do the dishes. After dinner, she scraped her plate, put it in the sink along with everyone else's, and then just walked away. She breezed right past the kitchen and went straight upstairs to her room, where I could soon hear the telltale pew-pew-pew sounds of her new, dad-funded gaming console. I stood there in the kitchen looking at the mountain of sauce-covered plates. Then I looked at Michael. He gave me that classic, "I'm right there with you, honey, but she's your daughter, so this is technically your department" husband look. You know the one. It's a look that says, "I'm right here with you, honey, but she's your daughter, so this is technically your department." So I took a deep breath and went upstairs to enforce the law. I found Chloe glued to her screen, her face illuminated by the flashing lights of some intergalactic battle. I tried to be calm and reasonable. I said, "Chloe, honey," my voice dripping with forced sweetness. "It's your turn for the dishes." She didn't even turn around, didn't even pause her game. She just said, her eyes still locked on the screen, "In a minute, Mom." Ah, in a minute. The universal teenage code for never. It's the polite way of saying there is a greater chance of a unicorn appearing in our kitchen and washing those dishes with its magical horn than there is of me doing it. I just stood there in her doorway, feeling completely powerless. It was this bizarre moment where you feel less like a mother and more like a middle manager trying to discipline a lazy employee who knows you don't have the authority to fire them. Do I push it? Do I insist and start a huge fight over something as dumb as dirty dishes? Or do I let it slide? And in doing so, signal that our new constitution is completely meaningless. Every tiny decision in a blended family feels like a high-stakes test, and I felt like I was failing with flying colors. It's a constant tightrope walk. You're trying to build a bridge to your stepchild, but you also have to make sure your own child doesn't burn that bridge down before you've even finished building it. So, I decided to let the dishes slide, just for the moment. I figured it was just a small skirmish, not worth the battle. But I was about to learn that the battle over the dishes was just a warm-up act. The real war, the one that would test every single rule we had just made, was about to begin the moment the clock struck 10. I now realize that the battle over the dishes was just a minor skirmish, a little border dispute, but the real war, the one that tested every nerve in my body, began later that week, when the big hand on the clock passed the 12 and the little hand passed the 10. It was Friday night. According to rule number 1 of our freshly minted family constitution, Chloe's curfew was 10 p.m. And at 10:01, she wasn't home. At 10:15, still not home. By 10:30, our quiet living room had turned into the command center for a low-grade panic attack. Michael was pacing. He's a pacer. Back and forth from the fireplace to the window, his footsteps wearing a groove in our new rug. He had this worried, frustrated look on his face, like an architect whose building wasn't being built on schedule. He needs things to be orderly, predictable, and a teenager breaking curfew? That is the definition of disorderly conduct. I was on the phone, doing the classic anxious mom routine. Call, voicemail, hang up, text, "Where are you?" Wait 2 minutes, stare at the phone, willing it to light up, repeat, nothing. Straight to voicemail, every time, which, as every parent knows, is 1,000 times worse than just a no answer. It means the phone is either off or you're being actively, consciously ignored. That's it. I'm gonna go find her, Michael finally announced, grabbing his car keys. No, Michael, don't, I said, trying to stop him. You know how she is. If you show up at her friend's house, it'll be a huge scene. She'll see it as a total invasion of privacy, and it will only make things worse. So we're just supposed to sit here and do nothing? He shot back, his voice tight with frustration. She's breaking the rules, Jessica, the rules we agreed on. And just like that, we started arguing. Not really at each other, but sort of around each other. We were both worried, but channeling it in completely different ways. I was operating from a place of, let's not make the angry teenager angrier. And he was coming from a place of, rules are rules and they must be enforced. That's one of the hardest parts of co-parenting, especially in a blended family. You're not just merging households. You're merging two completely different parenting philosophies, forged in the fires of your previous relationships. And you're usually trying to figure it out in the middle of a crisis at 10:45 on a Friday night when all you can picture is your daughter stranded on the side of the road. We were so caught up in our own debate, we almost didn't hear the key in the lock. But when she finally walked through that door at 11:15, the smell of cheap perfume and teenage rebellion filled the air. And the fragile piece we had worked so hard to find just a few days earlier shattered into a million pieces. When she finally walked through that door at 11:15, the smell of cheap perfume and teenage rebellion filled the air. She had that defiant look on her face, the one that says, I know I'm in trouble and I dare you to do something about it. And just like that, the fragile piece we had found just days before shattered into a million pieces. Michael, who had been pacing like a caged tiger, was on her in an instant. He wasn't yelling, but his voice was low and tight with that controlled anger that's somehow scarier than screaming. The rule is 10 p.m., Chloe, he said, standing right in front of her. It is over an hour past your curfew. This is unacceptable. Chloe just tossed her keys onto the entry table with a clatter. She didn't apologize. She didn't make an excuse. She just looked him up and down with this insolent little smirk. So what? She challenged, her voice dripping with contempt. You're gonna ground me? What are you gonna do? She took a step closer to him, and then she dropped the bomb. The one word, the one phrase that is the nuclear weapon in any blended family's arsenal. She looked him dead in the eye and said, You're not my dad. The words just hung there in the air, vibrating with cruelty. It was a direct hit, a gut punch. I saw the impact on Michael's face. All the anger just drained out of him, replaced with the look of complete shock and hurt. He physically recoiled, like he'd been slapped. He was trying so hard to be a father figure, to create a stable home, and with 5 little words, she had completely invalidated him, demoted him to just the guy who lived in her house. My protective instincts kicked in immediately. I stepped between them. Chloe, that is not okay, I said, my voice sharp. You do not speak to him like that. We are a family, and in this house, you will respect him. But I learned a hard lesson in that moment. By rushing in to defend my husband, I had inadvertently chosen a side. In Chloe's eyes, I had just picked the stranger over her. She looked at me with this wounded, betrayed expression, as if to say, You too, Mom? And then she did what all teenagers do when they've lost a fight. She turned, stormed up the stairs, and slammed her bedroom door with a thunderous boom that shook the whole house. We were left standing there in the entryway, Michael looking stunned and heartbroken, and me feeling like I had failed on every possible level. I had failed as a wife by not being able to get my daughter to respect my husband. I had failed as a mother by making my child feel like I had abandoned her. The challenge of being a step-parent isn't just about learning to love a child that isn't yours. It's about learning how to navigate the impossible politics of a family that is constantly being defined and redefined by who is real and who is not. Later that night, as Michael and I sat in our room trying to make sense of the wreckage, we were about to learn that Chloe wasn't the only one who felt that way, and that her real father was more than happy to reinforce that idea. After Chloe slammed her bedroom door, the loudest noise in the house was the sound of our failure. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with all the things we didn't know how to say to each other. Later, Michael and I were sitting in our bedroom, and the air was just thick with exhaustion. He wasn't angry anymore. He just looked defeated. I could see how much her words had hurt him, and my heart broke for him. I tried to smooth things over. "You can't be so hard on her, Michael," I said softly. "She's just a teenager. She's adjusting. She didn't mean it." But he just shook his head, a tired, sad look on his face. "But she did mean it, Jess. That's the problem." He let out a long sigh, the kind that feels like it comes from the bottom of your soul. "And you can't keep defending her. We have to be a team. If we're not on the same page, the kids will see it, and they'll drive a wedge right between us." He was right, of course. But then he said the thing that laid the whole painful truth of our situation bare. "I'm trying, Jessica. I really am. But she's right. I'm not her father. I'm just the guy whose rules she has to follow. And her real father, is on the other end of the phone telling her she doesn't have to listen to a word I say." And that was it. That was the core of the problem. The step-parent's dilemma. It's an impossible job. You're expected to have all the responsibility of a parent, but you're granted none of the authority. You're supposed to provide love and structure and rules, but you're constantly reminded that you're a substitute, an understudy. You can never be the real thing. Our conversation that night wasn't just about a rebellious teenager. It was about our own fears. Michael's fear of being an unwanted intruder in Chloe's life, my fear of failing to bridge the gap between my daughter and my husband. It was about the deep, frustrating helplessness you feel when you realize an outside force, an ex-spouse, is actively working to undermine the very foundation you're trying so desperately to build. We were trying to create a new family, but we were constantly being haunted by the ghosts of the old ones. We eventually fell asleep, emotionally drained, and with no real solution. I just hoped that maybe, with a new day, things would look brighter. But I had no idea that at that very moment, in the room down the hall, my daughter was on the phone, receiving a fresh set of marching orders from the enemy commander himself.
I wish I could say that after our big fight, Chloe went to her room and reflected on her behavior. I wish I could say she felt a little bit of remorse. But that's not what happened. Because instead, she did exactly what he had trained her to do. She picked up the phone and called her dad. Now, I wasn't in the room for this, of course, but I can picture it perfectly. I can hear the whole conversation in my head because I know both of the players in this little drama so well. I can just see her, lying on her bed, tears streaming down her face, some of them real, some of them for dramatic effect, and her voice, shaky, full of teenage angst, as she tells him her side of the story. "Dad," she'd say, sniffling into the phone, "it's horrible here. Michael yelled at me just for being a little late." And then he would deliver the line that serves as the foundation of his entire strategy. Remember what I told you. You only have one dad, and I've always got your back. That's the core of his manipulation. It's the classic us against the world tactic. He validates her feelings, tells her she's right to be angry, and positions himself as her only true ally. He's not just comforting his daughter, he's isolating her. He's teaching her that her mother's new family is the enemy, and he is her only safe harbor. It's a subtle but incredibly effective form of emotional poison. He builds a fortress around her, not to protect her, but to keep everyone else out. It's a lesson in control that I was only just beginning to understand. I wish I could say that was the end of it for the night, but I was about to get a first-hand lesson in just how deep that poison went. I decided to try and make peace with Chloe, to go to her room and just be her mom. But I stopped at her door because I heard something that made my blood run cold.
After talking with Michael, I knew I had to try and make things right with Chloe. I wasn't going to talk about the curfew or the rules. I just wanted to be her mom. I wanted to go in there, give her a hug, and let her know that even when we fight, I'm still on her team. I walked down the dark hallway to her room. A little sliver of light glowed under the door. I raised my hand to knock, but then I stopped. I could hear her talking. I figured she was still on the phone with Mark. I was about to just turn around and give her some privacy, but then I heard a voice that wasn't hers. It was Mark's, faint through the wood of the door. And the tone wasn't just comforting anymore. It was strategic. I know. It's a terrible thing to do, but I did it. I leaned in closer, held my breath, and I listened. At first, just the end of their conversation. I heard Chloe say something like, "But what am I supposed to do? They're making all these rules." And then I heard Mark's voice as clear as day, and the words he said, they are burned into my memory. "Just play along for now, sweetie. We'll show them. He's just a temporary problem." A temporary problem? My blood ran cold. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. This wasn't just a divorced dad being a little petty. This wasn't just him buying expensive gifts or playing the cool parent. This was something else entirely. This was a plan, a calculated, deliberate strategy to undermine my marriage, to turn Michael into an obstacle, a man to be ignored, to be outlasted. In that moment, I wasn't just Jessica, the mom. I was a woman standing in the hallway of her own home, listening to a man she once loved train her daughter to see love as conditional and loyalty as a weapon. It was the kind of betrayal that doesn't scream, it whispers. What do you do with a truth like that? Do you tell your husband and risk a war between the two most important men in your child's life? Do you confront your daughter and risk losing her forever? The rules of engagement had just changed, and I was the one who had to make the next move.
A temporary problem. Those 3 words just echoed in my head as I stood there in the dark. In that single moment, everything clicked into place. The Trojan horse gift, the constant digs at Michael, the way he always called himself her only real dad. It wasn't just a string of petty acts from a jealous ex. It was a campaign. And with that realization, he wasn't just my ex-husband anymore. He was my enemy. And he had just officially declared war on my new life, using my own daughter as his unwitting soldier. So now I had to make a choice. Do I confront Chloe and risk losing her trust completely? Do I tell Michael and start a war between the two most important men in her life? Or do I call Mark directly and fight fire with fire? If you were me, what would you do? Let me know in the comments. I'm reading all of them. And you're going to want to subscribe because in episode 3, my choice leads me to uncover a secret about Michael's late wife, a secret hidden in a locked box. And it is infinitely more dangerous than I ever could have imagined. Trust me, you don't want to miss it.